All dragons came from somewhere. Like fruit from a tree, they are the evolutionary descendants of the dragons that came before. The first dragons to ever have laid their talons on Pareena's soil. Her master race, her perfect creation. Hi, I'm your host Heatwave, and in today's little episode, I'll be exploring the first dragons, the proto-dragons, the firstborn, the Protowings. O great scarred one, I seek your wisdom. I seek to aid you. Under what? In return? Your wisdom. O great scarred one. You were there. You witnessed the skyfall. You witnessed our descent from the heavens. And you witnessed the birth of our species. Tell me. Tell me of all of such glory in the sky. Welcome back to the Wings of Fire spin-off series, Empire of Pareena. If you haven't done so already, please leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe so you don't miss any episodes that I publish. The Proto-Dragon. If there ever was a king of tyrants, then it would be the Proto-Dragon. The very first dragon created by the gods, and the biological gene sire of all winglets across Pareena, and even Pariah. So, in the beginning, when Pareena had raised the rock and the earth that would form her continent, she planned to populate its surface with demigods. A creature that was undeniably perfect. Nothing could best it. No disease or predator. And they would form a perfect society, an everlasting peace, as they simply lived and thrived. In her possession was the progenoid genome Dragonic, the original gene sequence for the dragon, the only one in existence. One spark from a god, and it could populate an entire continent with Protowings. Appearing as a stone sphere in space, Pareena spent an unannounced amount of time tinkering and moulding the progenoid genome Dragonic to her liking. The dragon is to be a creature made in her image, a being that adapts and survives to any environment or condition, and then becomes the apex predator of that environment. Unlike other animals on Pareena, who had no qualms with hunting their own, her dragons would be above such common and unacceptable behavior. They were to be a grand spectacle on the altar of the universe. When the progenoid genome Dragonic was ready, it curved from its position in orbit and fell directly towards the surface of Pareena. Already on the way down, it took on a sense of direction and awareness, to the point it began the first steps in its evolution. It split itself into multiple smaller projectiles. The small rock formations fell all over the continent, their meteorite descent peppering the landscape at randomized drop zones. Historically, this was called the Skyfall. From the smoke, the debris, and scorched earth rose up these new hatchlings, throwing off what remains of their shells and membrane fluid. These new little dragons dropped talon first into a brave new world. But that's the problem. They're all hatchlings, and hatchlings won't really survive long on their own. So the Protowings grew up quickly. Very quickly. In a matter of hours, the Protowings on Pareena underwent such a growth that by the time of the setting sun that day, they had all reached adulthood. At first, they may have been scattered over Pareena, but in some parts, the drop zones became new communities. Closely packed together, these small communities would become the first hints of dragon society in Pareena. The proto-dragons took on a more tribal-like state of mind. They stayed in small groups around areas of food and water. They sent out groups to hunt prey. They built shelters and forged fire to stay warm and safe. Those few proto-wings who landed, isolated from others, made great strides to seek out their own, a natural instinct to find their own kin. Eventually, the proto-wings formed into larger groups and communities, spread all across Pareena. These larger groups would become the foundation of what would become Pareena's winglets. They began to create borders and isolate themselves willingly from the other groups. These borders were referred to as land, and each land had its own territorial name. The border, though, was considered respected by the other groups. So, we have the Land of the Sun, Land of the Four Claw, Land of the Three, Land of the Seaborn, and Land of Heaven's Reach. These groups rallied around, originally, the oldest and most experienced among their ranks. These were some of the proto-wings who first emerged during Skyfall, and they had survived this long. They were called the Scar Ones, referring to all the scars they may have suffered through their time hunting prey on Pareena. The Scarred Ones had the wisdom and authority to make choices for the group. Once they passed on, any dragonets they had were seen as the next in line to take on the lineage of the Scarred Ones. The Proto-Wings did have a culture, a sort of rudimentary one though. They were more focused on survival than the arts, for example. But it was accepted that all Proto-Wings were created equally. Thus, hunting and harming other dragons was not considered a sociable act. As more and more Pareena winglets began to populate the surface, what was left of the proto-wings was seen as outcasts. And as they eventually died off, the new winglets ceased to care. Culturally, the proto-wings have a very positive attitude towards having lots of dragonets with different dragons, to help grow the population and diversify the gene pool. It was expected for male and females of one group to mate with as many dragons as they could find. Sometimes smaller groups would merge with larger ones for this very purpose. It was the responsibility of each female to take care of her dragonets, though. In their downtime, some proto-wings painted strange markings over their scales. These markings had almost no meaning except they looked nice, and the paint was made from water and smashed up rocks. The proto-wings, though, were no strangers to greed. They hoarded a lot of small items, especially bones. The leftover bones from prey were a sought-after commodity. Those proto-wings who found small reeds or plant fibers fashioned these bones into some of the first jewelry. Now let's look at the proto-wings biologically. Their internal organs and skeletal structure are identical to that of the winglets of Pareena today. They can also breathe fire. Externally, proto-wings have a far wilder appearance. Their scales were dark shades of red, becoming brighter as they aged. The proto-wings were also of quite a large stature, almost as big as a mudwing, or maybe even bigger. They had the basic shape of a dragon, but their wings were overtly large. Their talons were long and sharp, and made handling smaller objects that bit harder. The head is unlike any other winglet that's been seen in Pareena. A narrow snout leading to beady eyes, and 6 horns arranged into a crest. The ears sat vertically, not horizontally. While it may not seem like a lot, the proto-dragon embodies the basic premise of a dragon. It biologically is supposed to be basic, to provide an effective basis for evolution. Speaking of evolution, what actually happened to the Protowings? Well, simply put, they all died off to make way for the true winglets of Pareena. The proto-dragon was never designed to live very long. The average life expectancy was about 60 years. This was to allow for a more forced reproductive cycle, leading to a faster adaptation of new evolutionary changes with every new hatching. While it took a few centuries to show any signs of new upcoming winglets, every new generation of hatchlings grew slower, lived longer, and, at first, started to change their scales and shrink in size. For example, the first sandwings were strange looking. They had begun to grow their manes out as their horns grew smaller. Their scales changed color and became glossy and smooth, far better at adapting to the heat of the Mojave. Their tail spike became fat and swelled up to represent the forming of their toxic sac within their tail barb. And of course, their eyes began to change, becoming matte gray before turning to their solid black color. In a matter of centuries, proto-wings were no more. What was left was the winglets of Pareena. When the progenoid genome Dragonic found a stable genetic sequencing, it locked it in, meaning the only way to jumpstart the evolution in a dragon is a drastic change to their environment that forces them to biologically adapt. Pareena, who was well and truly still alive at this point, was overjoyed that her new dragons had managed to survive this long to take their final form. Now all she needed to do was guide her creations into a golden age of society and civilization, one that shall be the envy of all who create life in the void. The Proto-Wings didn't really have a significant impact on the modern Pareena dragon, in the context of culture, of course. Sure, they had their own primitive culture, but by the time they were all dead and gone, the other winglets had moved on from these tribal traditions and routines. What the Proto-Wings did leave behind are the foundations for the territory and dispositions of the new Pareena winglets. It was the meteorites that descended into the ocean that created the Coral City, or how the first scarred ones of the marshlands that created the three counseling bodies would lead to the forming of the three major clans of the Mudwings. It was the growing population of ice-like dragons and their growing class warfare that forced the new Icewings to travel up to the peaks of Claw Mountain, where they were far more comfortable, moving them away from what was becoming the new Skywings. So the final question remains, though. What evidence is left of the Proto-Wings? Well, there isn't any. This whole story of dragons falling from the heavens could all be made up, something to simply explain why dragons exist. The Empire of Pareena just doesn't have the technology to unearth anything related to the Protowings. They're just not that advanced. Could we ever see the return of the Proto-Dragons? No, not really. But who knows? Pareena is still full of secrets. We'll just have to wait and see, won't we? And that concludes another episode of the Wings of Fire spin-off series, Empire of Pareena. Thank you very much for listening. I've been your host, Heatwave, signing off.